Shalom and welcome to today's Middle East Report. In this programme today we'll be discussing why anti-Semitism is so toxic, not only for the Jewish community but also for our society at large. Warm welcome to the programme, and today's guest is all the way from North London. He's an investigative journalist. His name is David Collier. David, warm welcome to the Middle East Report.
Thank you very much for inviting me to come on this programme.
Pleasure. And David, do you want to share a little bit about your Jewish background growing up in this country as a Jewish person, and what you experienced when you were younger?
I grew up in East London, or Ilford. Came from traditional Jewish household. My bar mitzvah, Beehive Lane, Gans Hill. We did all of the traditional Jewish holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Pesach. And I would just call it a normal, semi-secular, traditional Jewish upbringing.
And when did you really discover a real kind of passion to be involved in Israel advocacy, in Zionism, which ultimately led you into journalism?
Okay, I went to Israel. I went on a kibbutz. Most people did, or a lot of people did back in those days. You wanted a gap year from university. I ended up loving the place. I fell in love with it from the moment I landed. I felt at home, which is something people don't often understand, but it's so true. I'd never been there before, and the moment I landed, I thought, this is my home. I ended up staying for 19 years. I opened up a business there. I was dealing with tourism, budget tourism, selling to backpackers. I opened a shop in central Tel Aviv where I was servicing tourist needs, and this was the very, very start of the internet. So I was online a lot in Lonely Planet forums, trying to promote my own business effectively. I would go in, I would give them advice, and I'd say, when you're here, come into my shop, we'll see what we can do for you. And it was the end of 1999, it's 2000, and suddenly, when the second Intifada exploded in Israel, the internet turned toxic. It was overnight. It was completely unexpected. I was in these forums giving travel advice, and suddenly there was 50 new accounts in there, all saying that Jews are Nazis, Israel's, and I didn't know it then, but this was the birth of the internet troll. What we see now was born. When I came back from Israel in 2006, I noticed a major difference, because I left in 1987. When I left in 1987, someone out on a gap year from university would go to a kibbutz. By the time I came back in 2006, it was a sea change. The whole way that Israel was portrayed in the UK was different. So I started to look at why. And this is how I entered it. I basically started to ask the question, what has happened? Why the change?
So can you tell us, from your experiences and how you've actually seen the change as well? Because if we go back a little bit and go to that period of 99 and early 2000, this is when the famous Camp David peace talks were taking place between Ehud Barak, Israel's Prime Minister then, and chairman of the PLO, Yasser Arafat, sponsored by Bill Clinton. And the feeling in Israel then was Israel's on the brink of real peace. And of course it changed with the Intifada, but no one saw this coming, did they?
No one saw, well, it depends what you mean by no one saw this coming. I was involved in Oslo. I spent most of the 1990s dealing with Palestinians inside the West Bank. I had meetings with high-level Palestinians like Hanan Ashrawi. Yeah. Because I spoke English, the Palestinians found me very comfortable to talk to. They weren't speaking in Hebrew. So I acted in some areas as a go-between between the Israeli Ministry of Tourism and the Palestinian people who were working on their tourism for their areas. I started a newspaper that was trying to promote Palestinian business as well as Israeli business. I was very much part of that camp. So there was an underlying realization that we were in trouble as early as 1994.
Yeah.
That things weren't going the way that people thought they would go. And so saw the collapse of Oslo. Yes, lots of people saw the collapse of Oslo, saw its failures, saw the underlying flaws in the entire paradigm. But nobody saw how social media would play such a major part in what was going to change the way that Israel was viewed in the West.
So would you say that what really changed during the Second Intifada was the Mohammed al-Dura situation? Because when I've looked at this case in France, French Jewish leaders identify this one single point as the rise of Jew hatred across France as the factor that inflamed French Muslim opinion against the Jewish population. Not all, but some.
If not the Dreyfus trial, then what? You just replace it with something. You're right, 100%. The spark was that incident. It may well have been completely staged, deliberately to do that. So if that's the argument, if they hadn't have staged that, they would have staged something else. We constantly see this whenever Israel is at conflict with the Arabs. They will try to get an incident that they can put on camera and portray Israel as the devil. You see it all the time today on social media. If you ever see Israeli soldiers on social media today, just look around and you'll see 7 or 8 cameras pointing in a direction. They are waiting for those soldiers to do something. They push children towards them. I saw one just 2 days ago where there is this child standing there pointing at an Israeli soldier. And you can see the cameras, the whole thing is staged. They're waiting for it to happen. So yes, you're right in that galvanized the Intifada, because it came, I think, on the 2nd or 3rd day. But if not that, then something else.
So how, for example, has the internet and the rise of social media had an impact on kind of anti-Semitism in portraying Israel in the most despicable light, really ever since the last Intifada started in 2000? This
doesn't just affect the Jews. This affects every single one of us. I've spent, after I came back, I basically put on a kafir, put on Palestinian, identified myself as a Palestinian activist. I put on the BDS badge, Free Palestine, and I started going to their events. I started going to their meetings, joining their groups. I created a Facebook account specifically for this purpose. It still exists today. They don't know what it is. It's quite a good one. And it's been operating now for quite a while. So I have a lot of friends who are key Palestinian activists. And when you embed yourself in this world, when you open this particular profile in the morning, all you see is hate. It's all you see. It's a stream of messages that most of it's not true. If some of it is true, then every conclusion they've drawn from that truth is a lie. The media sources are none of the ones we would normally recognise. They don't even hand The Guardian around, which was traditionally, obviously, the media, one of the media outlets of the left. They don't even use that. That, to them, is Zionist media. The Independent, which I consider toxic, is too right-wing for them. The media sources they use are alternative media sources only. It's the only thing they read. They share it amongst themselves. They do it in secret and private groups. They cut off anybody that disagrees with them. And this is an important part of the creation of this bubble. If there is a Zionist in the mix, he will be blocked, kicked out the group. So the only thing that is left are, for example, talking about Palestine Live, for example, is a group of 3,000 people, all of whom hate Jews, all winding each other up about how toxic Israel is and about the evils of Israel and so on and so forth. And they create this environment where 18 posts a day talk about the death of a child, for example. It's just 18 posts a day, they talk about the death of a child. They'll show an image from 10 years ago, pretend it was yesterday, or they'll show an image from Syria and pretend that it was Gaza. And there'll be one after the other. So you have all of these people winding each other up saying, oh my God, all these children are dying today, now. It's happening now. All these children are being killed. And then they come off Facebook and they turn on the TV. And there's no one talking about it. How is it possible that Israel could be doing all of this and it's not on the BBC and it's not on Sky? And this reinforces the myth that the Zionists have control of the media. The Zionists, all this is going on, and the Zionists are suppressing the truth. More and more demonization, not just of Israel now, but of the Jewish people in the world that are controlling the media and the banks and so on.
And, I mean, there's been a lot of news stories over the last couple of years, particularly exposing Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, with this Palestinian Live group. I mean, one of those is that horrific memorial posted on a wall with the so-called elders of Zion, with suppressing the people below, and they're all painted as kind of Jewish. And Jeremy Corbyn was asking why that should be taken down. So from this material, you're able to gather what he truly thinks and his worldview, particularly in light of the whole anti-Semitism scandal that is making the whole Labour Party absolutely toxic under his leadership. What have you discovered?
Well, Palestine Live was one of my key sources for several years because all of the high-profile anti-Israel activists are inside it, all of them. I was shocked to see Jeremy Corbyn was in there as well. I found him in discussions because it's a very large group and there's a lot of conversations taking place, so it's not like somebody stands out. I was doing some research into an event that took place in 2014 in Westminster. Now, they had Max Blumenthal come over and talk. Max Blumenthal was a bit late, and they had someone called James Tring, I think his name was, stand up and do a bit of a speech first. Now, James Tring is, rabid, far-right racist. So I was looking at that event, and I suddenly saw that Jeremy Corbyn was in that stream. He was talking. Now, this was a secret Facebook group. It wasn't an open public one. It wasn't even a closed or private one. This was secret, which means that even if you search for it on Facebook, you wouldn't know it was there. And he was discussing with a few people about letting Max Blumenthal into Westminster. So this is Jeremy Corbyn's office talking with people inside Palestine Live about bringing extremists from America and conspiracy theorists from America and giving them the keys to a Westminster meeting room. So I followed his activities within that group and wider, and the relationships he had with some of these people. And these people, they're not people on the... It's important to understand, we're not talking about people on the left who want Israel to be a bit more generous or think that Israel's behaving a bit badly towards Palestinians. We're talking about people who push Holocaust denial. We're talking about people who talk about Zionist control of the media. One of the people in the comment stream uses hashtags like Jew-United States of America. These are rabid anti-Semites, and Jeremy Corbyn looked completely at home in that environment.
And what does that say about him?
It says he's completely at home in that environment. One of the big differences I do notice, if I'm on my own Facebook page and someone posts something that is nasty, like a comment that it can be slightly racist, or it can display some level of anti-Muslim hatred, or something like this, there'll be an argument. Someone will immediately flag it. Okay, they'll say, hey, this is... And there will be a conversation take place. We have a moderation going on between normal people online about the kind of what's truth, what's a lie, what's acceptable, and what's legitimate and what's not. That doesn't exist on the other side. You know, the Holocaust denial post would have 50 shares and 240 likes. if somebody, there'll be a stream of comments underneath it about, and the Red Cross hoax, or whichever hoax it is, and the Jews, they were all just ill, or they would just work too hard, or this didn't happen, or it's about the numbers, whole string, and all of them will have likes. If there is a comment in there that says, that's Holocaust denial, it's horrific, there won't be any likes on it. It is a completely sealed environment where only hatred, and it's not just of the Jews, hatred of anything to do with Judeo-Christian values, the West, any of this is effectively the enemy.
Which is toxic. And this is what we're seeing in the Labour Party. So how has, for example, we've got to this stage where we see this anti-Semitism now completely dominate the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, and how, I would say that Jew hatred has gone from the margins to the mainstream.
Okay, I wasn't really interested in British politics at all. My interest was Israel, peace, and the Middle East, and the situation with the Arabs in the Middle East. This has always been my key interest, and I was following anti-Zionism and looking at the anti-Semitism within anti-Zionism. I had no part to play in British politics at all. And I was inside these groups looking at my expertise, my field of expertise. And suddenly I noticed something in 2015. 2015, in Palestine Live, for example, I suddenly see people starting sharing the posts saying, join the Labour Party, vote for this man. Now, that's not a Labour Party forum. This is an anti-Israel forum, and these people would start joining the Labour Party. There were two waves, one in 2015, one in 2016. Jeremy Corbyn didn't actually cause it. It was Miliband who changed the rules before him to make it so easy to join the Labour Party. But suddenly we had all of these people joining the Labour Party. And there's another thing that's important to understand. It's not... The idea of right-wing and left-wing is misplaced when you're talking about the extremes. It works when you're dealing with the centre. When you're dealing with people who are in the centre, it's slightly centre-left, centre-right, left-wing, right-wing, it works. As soon as you push out to the extremes, the idea of right-wing and left-wing collapse. They're all together. What gets shared in those groups isn't alternative websites that are pro-left or pro... It's rabid, toxic conspiracy theorist sites. And you follow the path and you find that you're actually in Southern America somewhere, dealing with some white supremacist site. I mean, this is... I've seen people from the Labour Party, today's Labour Party, share websites like whitesupremacy.com, whiteresistor.com. I mean, it's insane. But these people are not of the left. They may identify as such, but they're very much extreme, whichever way you want to look at it. And they joined the party. Now, not only did they join it, but the rules allowed them, or allowed the new members that have been unfiltered, to basically take control of the mechanisms within the party, the formation of momentum, for example. And then we have the real problem. When the anti-Semitism first started, when people like myself started saying, you know what, you've got some bad apples there, you really want to get rid of them, the Labour Party had a choice. It needed to deal with the problem straight away. And it didn't. And that is the crime here. The crime is not that they accepted some bad apples. The crime is that they didn't deal with the problem. I'm working on a new report right now. And the focus isn't on the anti-Semites who were anti-Semitic in 2014. I'm looking at, I'm not going to mention her name now, one of the case studies. She was a Labour member. And she'd been a Labour member in 2013, 2014. Her Facebook post is full of pro-Labour posts, 2013, 2014. Then suddenly in June 2015, she posts, I'm voting for Corbyn. Okay. Within days of his election in September, she posts her first Israel post. Now, think about this. 2014 was the Gaza conflict. There was nothing on her time stream about Gaza or Israel. That didn't move her. Okay, now, the first post was post-Corbyn. Within a year, she's posting Rothschild conspiracy. Because she sees, she's a loyalist, and she's come out to bat for her team. And the opposition in this war are the Jews. So she's fighting the Jews.
Let's have a look now at this excellent report put together by I-24, which poses the very important question, can Jews live in this country?
The British exodus, rising anti-Semitism, a predominant Corbyn scare, and a general sense of insecurity. Is UK jury facing crisis mode?
A week doesn't go by where somebody doesn't hoot some anti-Semitic taunt at me. This didn't happen years ago.
I'd like her to grow up not being known as a Jew.
If Jeremy Corbyn were to get in, I think then you will see a radical movement of Jewish people to Israel.
The threat of one party taking over, as is likely to happen in government, means that 40% of an ethnic minority feel they may not actually be able to stay in the country. It's astonishing that we've reached this stage.
These are not just sentiments. During 2018, there were no less than 1,652 recorded anti-Semitic incidents in Britain, a 16% increase from the year before, and the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents recorded in a single year in the kingdom since 1984. This, however, is only the very beginning, many believe, if Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn will take over the Prime Minister's seat.
The Labour Party was always the most fiercely anti-racist party in the UK. If you had a problem with racism, if you had a problem with anti-Semitism, the first party you're going to ask for help is the Labour Party.
Even to the most obsessive political observer, Jeremy Corbyn was an entirely obscure backbencher in the Labour Party whose views carried no weight whatsoever. So the fact that he was off meeting Hamas, meeting Hezbollah, meeting Raid Salah, meeting all kinds of people was irrelevant. Nobody cared.
All I know is about my Labour Party is that the Labour Party left me. I didn't leave the Labour Party. The Labour Party left me, and it's left me where I was in the middle.
The reason that Labour found it so difficult to adopt a definition of anti-Semitism is because they didn't want to. Because actually the leadership of the Labour Party, I have to say, and it's not a word or an accusation one should throw lightly, is fundamentally anti-Semitic.
And these grim prospects are encouraging many British Jews to consider a dramatic change.
The Jewish population here in Britain is very comfortable. They're very British, and they're very proud of being British. And that's a difficult decision to make, to move to Israel. You can be as aligned and as loving towards Israel, but at the same time very British.
Jeremy Corbyn come in, I think that may well open the gates to physical manifestations of underlying anti-Semitism.
In Israel, there's definitely a place for us to go, feel safe, and kind of feel safe to practice our kind of religious values and things like that.
I heard the statement, if Corbyn gets elected, we're moving straight away. I've heard it so many times.
If once upon a time making Aliyah was a far-fetched dream, today it's turning into the reality of today and tomorrow.
As the public discourse from left to right is getting more and more extreme, many believe it also exposes the real nature of modern anti-Semitism.
I think the lesson, the biggest lesson of all, of the whole Corbyn fiasco is that this idea that that anti-Semitism is just sort of, skinheads and Nazi types.
They stray between the far right and the far left seamlessly. One minute they're talking about how Jews invented the Holocaust, and the next minute they're talking about how Jews are evil, elitist capitalists trying to exploit the working classes.
The moment you strip that away, it takes 2 seconds for that whole mask to unravel, and then actually what you see coming out is the most appalling anti-Semitic poison.
But British Jews have no intention of giving up without a fight, a battle they believe is crucial for the fate of world Jewry as a whole.
Why don't you Jews ever ask yourselves, what is it that you do that makes people hate you? Why is it you've been expelled from country after country? Why did the Nazis feel the need to exterminate you? And we can't answer that question because the fact is, we didn't do anything.
Israel has a right to exist What the government is, what it isn't, what it's doing is irrelevant to that debate. Nobody says because Trump is the president of America that America should cease to exist.
We cannot afford to lose this fight in Britain. We can't afford to pack our bags and go somewhere else. We have to fight. We have to win the argument here because we're right. And if we fail to win this argument, Britain will not be the last domino to fall.
Ellie Hochenberg, I-24 News.
Very good report, but a very troubling report put together there by I-24. David, you've explained how really Jeremy Corbyn and particularly this movement that is behind him have taken hold of the Labour Party. But how much of this is also down to the nature of votes, and knowing, for example, that in 2014, with Israel's defensive war against Hamas in Gaza, created a political sea change in the fact that many British Muslims felt the right and the need to contact their MPs regarding Israel on a scale that we've never seen before. So how has the growing Muslim populations in some of our big working class cities had a profound impact on MPs in Westminster, and also then ultimately Labour's foreign policy and direction? And does this underpin Jeremy Corbyn's support base, knowing that he needs to cultivate these voters, who sadly many of them hold anti-Semitic viewpoints because they had the conflict from the Middle East imported to our country and see it through that prism?
Very much so. It's difficult to understate what it is you're trying to say, get across here or ask me. I'm actually doing a case study at the moment looking at Sheffield as evidence of this particular problem. Now, we live in a bubble here. I'm inside London. When I see activity in London, a few Jewish people and some of their allies will go out and counter it. So and I've been at hostile events in university, in unions, at a local Labour council or whatever, there's opposition. And when something to do with Israel is tabled, there is somebody around that table who will raise a voice in opposition to what's being said. But that isn't the case outside of this bubble. The Jews, we're what, 250,000 of them, maybe only 150, 160,000 or so identify really as part of the community. Outside of where we live, we don't exist. And so you're looking at cities where there's been a major demographic change over the last few decades. And these people, they need to find a way of working together. They need to find a way to communicate together. They need to find common causes. So you take a city like Sheffield. Now, Sheffield has its major Labour stronghold. I think all of the constituencies are held by Labour. Actually, one's independent. He resigned, but he was voted in as Labour. The council is staunchly Labour. There are two universities, and universities are a hotbed for anti-Israel activism. There's the University of Sheffield and there's Sheffield Hallam. The Palestine Solidarity Campaign itself is riddled with anti-Semitism, has a branch in Sheffield. Labour Friends of Palestine has a branch of Sheffield. And what else are these people going to talk about? There isn't any other international issue that would be acceptable to their communities. They have a large Pakistani community, they've got a Somalian community, they've got a Bangladeshi community. Everybody is around that table, apart from the Jews, which makes Israel a prime target. If from the soft left that have bought into the Oslo paradigm, that believe that Israel are being unreasonable, that believe that Israel should give up the territories, that believe that in the two-state solution and that there would only be peace if Israel was nicer, they're willing to accommodate people who think Israel, the answer is a one-state solution, and so on and so on. There's a conversation that can take place between them. They can't talk about how nasty Pakistan is. They can't start looking at the Arab world, talking about what's going on there, because the Muslim demographic wouldn't accept it. So what's left on the table is Israel. And I think that is part, and an important part, the demographic change, an important part of what is taking place.
I suppose the very, very big question we have to ask, and everyone wants to know, and this is a conversation that's been dominating your community now for a few years, and that is, what is the prospect of Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister? And ultimately, if he was Prime Minister with his worldview and the henchmen he have around him, what kind of government would he put together and what kind of foreign policy would he have? Because I did an interview recently in the Knesset with Dr. Mike Owen, who was then in the Prime Minister's office as a minister, and he was openly talking about that Israel would be preparing to cut off diplomatic relations overnight with the UK.
Firstly, that's the horror scenario, that Corbyn actually gets the keys to number 10, and not just for British Jews. I think that it would see the collapse of our traditional Judeo-Christian values in this country. So many people will be affected. Personally, I can start by saying I don't believe he is going to make it. Okay, personally, I don't think he's going to make it. That's the good news for me. The bad news is I don't think it matters. The issue now is the Labour Party, not Jeremy Corbyn. And it's far deeper than just him and his sidekick and a little clique of people he's got around him. There is a poison that has infected that party. And as I believe the EHRC report will show, the party is in serious trouble. I personally believe it's beyond salvation. And where the question lies now is, okay, are we just dealing with an issue in the Labour Party, or has this actually infected British society as a whole? Are we looking at something wider than just the party? Are we looking at something, a long-term battle now, and a deteriorating situation? You see, this has been going on for decades. Corbyn isn't new. Corbyn was around 30, 40 years ago. So were all of the people around him doing exactly the same thing. All that's happened is their ideology has grown, aligned obviously with the Islamist political thing. The Red-Green Alliance has grown to a point where it could now take over a mainstream political party, which what has happened. Kick them out of that party, they're still going to be there. What's their next move? It's that alignment, the alignment between the radical red and obviously the Islamist green, that is posing a major threat. So what would they do? Firstly, yes, if these people ever achieve power, the relationship with Israel would go overnight. It would have major kickback from within the British establishment. The police, the security forces, everybody or every organisation that is concerned with your safety on our streets would be screaming at the Corbyn government, saying, don't do this, don't do it, because Israel are not just our friends, but they're saving British lives.
Absolutely.
You have no idea of the level of coordination between the countries. So there would be major kickback, but these are ideologues. They don't care. They have the power, and they will start making their moves from the very first day they take power, and it'll be bad.
And David, I have to analyse everything you've just said and to take in everything that you've spoke about. Is this really being driven primarily because of the decline of our Judeo-Christian heritage here in Britain and in the West, that we no longer, as a society, has become so secular that we no longer see these threats or view the threat of radical Islam through the prism of Christianity that people knew in the country before? So they're mixing Christianity with Islam and realising these are two totally different religions, combined with the fact that what makes this unholy alliance with the ultra-left is that it's only their hatred for Israel and the Jews that actually unites them. Other than that, they would have no premises for uniting, because ideologically they're completely opposed to one another on so many different issues, including social issues.
The problem is that it is one of the key pillars of the problem. I mean, there's going to be several pillars. I don't believe, A, I don't believe in absolutes, and B, I don't believe in looking for the easy answer. This is a very complex issue. The collapse of the belief in God, if you like, amongst so many people, is one of the elements that is having an impact. You can see that because certainly in the rise of conspiracy theory. My own personal belief is that conspiracy theorists are people who are trying to fill the void. Having not given up on a belief in God, they want to know, well, okay, so who is pulling the strings? Why is this happening? And now it can't be God, so who is it? So, for example, the rise of conspiracy theory, I believe, is directly related to this issue. The rise of social media, the drop in attention span. You know, people. If you, when I'm arguing with someone, they'll stand there and they'll put a picture of a dead baby from Gaza. That's it. That's their argument. The dead baby from Gaza, maybe from Gaza because people got killed in Gaza. It could be from Syria. They don't really care, and they've automatically won the audience. Now, how do I address that? I need more than 280 characters to explain why that baby is dead. I cannot possibly get my message across in less than 280 characters. And so I'm immediately on the back foot. This is another pillar. It's people's attention span's gone. No, they don't care what the truth is anymore. They just want yes or no, which side, you know, who should I go for? It's another element of it. As I mentioned a bit earlier, this negotiation between elements of British society that have given up on the Judeo-Christian thing, who don't necessarily see the potential harm of an extreme Islamist position. They see their Muslim friends and they seem very nice, and they are very nice, and they see them as human beings as they should, and so on and so forth, and they can't split between that and the rise of radical Islamist ideologies. And if I'm attacking a radical Islamist ideology like Hezbollah, it's nothing to do with my neighbour, who may be a perfectly decent guy. So they've broken down the barriers of what's true. You know, they say, and they throw it around a lot, that we live in a post-truth world, and it's too casually used because truth has broken down. The idea now, they talk about narratives. They don't talk about truths, they talk about narratives. It's about truth, not about narratives. And two stories are not equal just because two different people may say them. One is true and one is a lie, and there is a big difference between the truth and the lie. And just because he's saying it doesn't give it equal weight. Has he got evidence? Is it just a feeling? Is it just a memory? Is it just what somebody said? You place that, and you can bring this back explicitly to the Israeli conflict, because that's what's happening with Israel. On the one side, you have the facts, what really happened, how the conflict evolved. And on the other hand, you have a narrative, something that didn't happen. It didn't happen. The Nakba didn't happen. Okay? Certainly not the way that they suggested it did. But somehow we're meant to hold these as equal, the Israeli truth and the Arab narrative. And each must have its time. Another way of looking at it is panorama. If you look at panorama, you'll see that we're dealing with anti-Semites. We're dealing with anti-Jewish racists. Why do the anti-Jewish racists need to be given a voice? At what time, at what point did our media stoop down to the level that if you're going to have a victim of rape on your programme, must you always also have the rapist's case as well? You don't. There is a truth, there is a crime, there is racism, there is rape, and the people that are responsible for that don't need to be given equal airtime. So that's also part of it.
So let's have a look now at a trailer for what was an excellent documentary produced by BBC's Panorama, looking into the investigation of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party.
On a number of cases which I worked on, the people that she brought in when she became General Secretary overruled us and downgraded what should have been a suspension to just an investigation, or worse, to just a reminder of conduct, effectively a slap on the wrist.
The emails that you've shown me are really important. The issues that are raised within them should ring alarm bells across the party. To try to interfere politically within the NCC is just wrong.
When I first read it, I wondered how on earth I'd be able to apply for jobs, because it was so prescriptive in not speaking about anything that I had heard of or happening in the Labour Party. But I won't be able to live with myself unless I speak up about the horrendous things that I know have been happening.
This was the leader's office requesting to be involved directly in the disciplinary process. This is not a helpful suggestion, it is an instruction without needing to say it.
So that video there was produced by The Guardian, which showed an extract of that excellent BBC documentary produced by Panorama, looking into the problem of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. I suppose you were also interviewed for that programme, but they didn't actually use your material, David. But I suppose the big question of why that interview, why that programme has become such a powerful weapon against those who hold the anti-Semitic position within the Labour Party and the leadership of the Labour Party is primarily because the Panorama interviewed those people who were dealing with the complaints of anti-Semitism and then facing the bullying and the intimidation from top down, which shows that really the issue of anti-Semitism has become so toxic and poisonous in the Labour Party that it's destroying the Labour Party. And this is what anti-Semitism does, doesn't it? It starts with attacking the Jews, but never finishes with the Jews until the whole of society is actually destroyed and taken up with it, if we look back in history.
Absolutely. I was interviewed. They tended to focus, as you just pointed out, far more on the institutional side of the anti-Semitism rather than the evidence of the anti-Semitism itself. But yes, this issue within the Labour Party of institutional anti-Semitism, and it's important to understand what that is. It doesn't mean that every single Labour Party member is an anti-Semite. It's an environment which basically protects or creates anti-Semites. And that's what the Labour Party has become, an incredibly toxic political group that reached quite quickly the point that enhancing or even enabling the anti-Semitism was the way forward for them. These must have been decisions that took place back in 2015 and 2016. There must have been meetings at the very highest level of Labour about what should we do about this. And the answer was effectively oppose it. Not the anti-Semitism, but the accusations of anti-Semitism. It was a strategic political choice that Labour saw as a vote winner, or at least something they had to do to hold their ideology together, to fight the Jewish people. And it never ends with the Jews. It is something, it starts with the Jews, and it will move on to the next group, and it will impact all of our freedoms and all of our values and all of our lives.
So let's have a look now at this video in which many Jewish people are protesting about the rise of anti-Semitism and the leadership of the Labour Party's failure to tackle this toxic problem.
Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! For the landing of the Jews! For the landing of the Jews! For the landing of the Jews!
We're protesting today because it's not up to the Labour Party to determine what the Jewish people define as anti-Semitism. It's up to the Jewish people to define what anti-Semitism is.
I was a Labour voter, always a Labour voter. My family were heartbroken now. I've got nowhere to go. I now feel unsafe in this country. I now feel it's unsafe for my children, for my grandchildren, and that Jeremy Corbyn Corbyn is a very dangerous individual.
The argument that Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic is absolutely not true. I think we reject the IRHA definition because I think we're allowed to talk about a state that is actively killing Palestinians and, I would argue, pushing genocide on the Palestinian people.
Zionism is a right-wing political ideology which wants to destroy Jeremy Corbyn because Jeremy Corbyn is a socialist, and that's why they're here. They're pretending he's an anti-Semite because that's the only way they can get at it.
I've no reason to want to undermine the leader of Her Majesty's opposition, but I don't feel that we have an opposition. And I think Jeremy Corbyn's bad for Labour, he's bad for the United Kingdom, and he's bad for our country and for Jews.
And if we weren't already awake to the dangers posed by the leadership of the Labour Party, then we need to wake up, because if our Jewish community feels very threatened, then ultimately we know that our society is in a dangerous place. Having looked at everything we've said, and you've developed, David, some very worrying trends that we're seeing, particularly this unholy alliance between the far left and radical Islamists, and the way that they've hijacked Her Majesty's opposition, a major political party that could win a general election and go on to become the next government. We pray that it won't happen, but it could happen. What are the consequences if we do nothing and allow this to continue without stopping it and raising our voices and making our politicians aware of the dangers that we're living in?
Well, look, there's the personal and there's the national. The personal consequence, I do not know a single Jewish family that has not discussed leaving. That's the personal. We haven't got our suitcases packed. We won't go that far. But I know, I don't know a single family that hasn't discussed, okay, what will we do if, when we will leave, how will we leave, and where will we go? Obviously many to Israel, but not everybody. The national level, look, I said before that the Jews aren't everywhere. We're a tiny minority, and the whole point about minority groups is exactly that. They're not there. Minority groups need protecting because they don't have a voice and they're not present in the room. And it was the duty of the Labour Party to protect the minorities that were not there. But what's happened is exactly the opposite. We're looking at, and I'll bring up Sheffield again, rooms, Labour Party rooms that have many people represented, all of them with sizable demographic populations, and they're picking on the minority that's not in the room. So the first thing I do is I would say, raise your voice. You know, the Jewish people on this particular issue seriously need people to raise their voice. They need their friends to be in the rooms that they cannot be inside. Where Israel or the Jews are mentioned or anti-Semitism is mentioned, speak up for them. You know, open your mouth and say, no, this is not right. You know, they're not here. We're picking on a minority group here. We're picking on the small kid who can't fight back. The consequences of not stopping it are sky high. You know, any student of history can tell you that if you do not stop it when it starts, and it will start as anti-Semitism. The Soviets did the same thing. You know, back in just after the revolution, the Russians created a special unit of fringe Jewish people to attack the Jewish community, very much like Labour have done with Jewish Voice for Labour. It's almost exactly the same kind of policy. It blurs the line so nobody knows what's Jewishness, what's a Jew, what's a Zionist, or everybody's... All of these questions shouldn't exist. So it's a question of stopping it before, as it did with the Soviets, as it did with the Nazis, destroying every single element of the nation.
And I suppose when we're looking at what we're seeing, it's almost as if we're going through another 70-year cycle or 80-year cycle. And when we look at trends of anti-Semitism, we see that they go up and they go down for periods of time. Could we be on the verge of something world changing. I mean, if we look at the other two major trends, so we had in the 1890s the Dreyfus Affair in France, which led Theodor Herzl to write the book Der Judenstaat, The Jewish State, which led to the birth of political Zionism that became the ideology for the modern state of Israel. If we look at the rise of anti-Semitism in the 1930s, with the rise of fascism and Nazism, unfortunately and horrifically led to the Holocaust. And again, we're seeing another huge rise of global anti-Semitism. What do you think is around the corner?
Trouble. I think this is the start of the problems. And even if we're successful, even if, you know, we get the Labour Party to throw anti-Semitism out, and this is not enough. It's not going to solve the problem. The problem is a societal problem. It always is a societal problem. People focus too much on what's happening rather than what's causing these things to happen. And the rise of the Red-Green Alliance in this country and throughout Europe, and even in some parts of the United States, is a worrying trend that would have global consequences for all of us. Yes, it's a cycle, and it's not inevitable. You know, I foresee trouble because not enough people are paying attention to what's taking place, and they're not realizing what's the underlying cause. But if we can identify the problem, if we can identify what's causing it, if we can stop it by standing strong to what has made us what we are now. You know, we're successful nations for a reason. Absolutely. If we can stick by what we know is tried and trusted, if we can keep the freedoms and the generosity and the belief, the values that we have cherished and fought and died for, then there's still a chance.
Absolutely. And there's always Israel, which didn't exist 80 years ago. Sure. So that's a major breakthrough for the Jewish people, that the Jewish people always have a homeland to go in, protected by one of the most powerful and effective armies in the world, including Air Force and Tank Force and everything else. So, David, I just want to thank you for being my guest on today's Middle East Report. It's been fascinating, and thank you so much for giving us your insight, and our viewers really need to keep you in prayer because you're doing tremendous work in bringing all these issues to the forefront of public opinion. So thank you so much for being my guest on today's Middle East Report.
So much for having me here. It's been a pleasure.
And I just want to thank you for watching today's Middle East Report. You might think, why do we constantly go on and talk about the problems of the rise of Jew hatred? The reason is because the Jewish people are God's people. They are his precious people. This is his precious land. And we know that this is a fight that if we want our societies to thrive, if we want our nation to thrive, then we stand with Israel and we stand with the Jewish people in these turbulent times. So I want to thank you for watching today's Middle East Report, and I leave you with this beautiful song that is in the heart of every Christian who loves Israel and the Jewish people themselves, the holy city of Jerusalem.
אנחנו בתוך העיר העתיקה. שמחתי הר הבית בידינו, כאן תמיד הר הבית בידינו.
Jerusalem, the golden city never forgotten, the beating heart of Jewish faith in every generation. Jerusalem, the city of peace, where you can feel the divine presence like nowhere else on earth, the focus of Jewish life and prayer. Jerusalem, the old new city, for the old and renewed people.